On this week's 51%, we take a look at the gender pay gap in the U.S. and speak with America Saves Director Kate McCallister-Young to learn how you can build a savings plan that leaves you feeling financially confident.
Knowing exactly where you stand and where you want to go is one of the only things that we can control about our personal finances.
We also recognize the life and legacy of a pioneer labor leader from upstate New York. I'm Jessie King. It's all up next on 51%.
I was standing around like one of those girls I had seen in a movie. The whole world was a movie back then. I had my sunglasses on, I wanted to be seen without seeing shy Lolita. I wasn't really in it, I didn't really get it.
You're listening to 51%, a WAMC production dedicated to women's issues and experiences. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Jessie King. March 14th was Equal Pay Day in the U.S., and unlike Women's History Month or International Women's Day, it's not a day of celebration so much as it is a day of awareness. According to the U.S. Department of Labor, the gender pay gap stands at an average of about 83.7%. Basically, that means for every dollar men make, women, on average, make about 83 to 84 cents for the same job. That's an average difference of about $10,000 a year, meaning it takes women 15 months to earn the same amount that their male counterparts earned in 12. The call for equal pay for equal work has been echoed by women since at least the 1860s, when it first popped up as a major political issue. So that's where we're going to start today. Recently, Brookdale Community College in Middletown, New Jersey, held a webinar for students and staff detailing the gender pay gap called Equal Pay and Your Career. Because even if we vehemently disagree with it, it's something that we as working women and students have to contend with. Guest speaker Mary Gatta is the Director of Research and Public Policy at the National Association of Colleges and Employers, or NACE. She says it's important to remember that number of about 83.7% is an average, and it ends up actually mostly applying to white women.
Black and Hispanic women face a larger pay gap relative to white and Asian women. So all women are facing a pay gap, but not all women equally.
If we keep going at the pace we're on now, and the Pew Research Center says the U.S. hasn't made much progress at all in the past 2 decades, Gatta predicts the wage gap will decrease first for Asian women in 2041, then for white women in 2069, for black women in 2369, and for Hispanic women in 2451. And according to the Center for American Progress, the gap is tied to other demographics as well, like age. Women aged 55 to 64 earn 22% less than men, while women aged 65 and older can see as much as 27% less than their male coworkers of the same age. So why is this still the case? Gatta says women now make up a majority of the college student population, trying to better their education to get higher paying jobs. So how hard is it to just start paying women more? Mary Jane Daly, Professional Development Director for the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT, says there's actually a long history of trying to close the gap, the first major step being the Equal Pay Act of 1963. Daly says the Equal Pay Act outlawed wage discrimination based on sex, but it left out a number of exceptions and loopholes. For example, allowing businesses to implement pay structures based on things like seniority or merit. In 2009, President Barack Obama signed the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, expanding the period in which women can file a discrimination claim against their employer. And Daly says yet another bill, called the Paycheck Fairness Act, has been introduced repeatedly by House Democrats in recent years to shore up the Equal Pay Act, end pay secrecy, and prohibit employers from screening job applicants by their pay history. But so far it has failed to pass the Senate. However, Daly says that hasn't stopped some states from acting on their own.
20 states have salary history bans, including New Jersey, so don't forget that. And the intention here is to prevent employers from using your salary history as a basis for whatever salaries they might be offering you. Some regions of the country believe that transparency is an important part of improving pay equity. And Colorado and New York City, which many of you might have heard of, effective November 2022, are among the most stringent in this regard, requiring businesses to include minimum and maximum pay ranges in their job advertisements.
A new report by the Women's Bureau at the U.S. Department of Labor endeavored to look at the causes of the pay gap and found about 30% of it can be traced back to individual worker statistics, your age, education, industry, whether you're full or part-time, etc. But the other 70% is unexplained, or at least harder to capture in a statistical model. What it did find is that even industries that traditionally rely on female workers, like the care economy and the service sector, offer low wages. And when women start to enter male-dominated fields in greater numbers, the average pay for those jobs goes down. So at a certain level, women's labor is simply devalued. So what can you do? Well, if you're a business owner, Daly says you can pledge to review your current policies and increase pay transparency with your employees. Gada says even the kinds of internships you provide can also play a key role in who you invite to your industry.
Internships are important recruiting tools and important pathways to jobs. But to take an unpaid internship means you have to be able to forego pay, and not everybody can do that, right? So paid internships make a difference. But what we see in terms of who gets paid internships, what our data shows us, is that men are about 57% of paid interns, while women are about 43%. And when we look at the proportion of men and women in paid internships in relationship to their proportion in the overall student population, men are actually overrepresented in paid internships and women are underrepresented.
If you're a student getting ready to enter the job market upon graduation, Daly says it's important to know your rights and to know your future employer. She says MIT's Career Advising and Professional Development Office has tons of resources across various fields on its website. She also encourages women to talk to their friends, to their peers, about what they make, as taboo as it may sound.
I think it's the culture of privacy that has allowed this to perpetuate. And I think a lot of times people either think, oh, the problem doesn't apply to me, or I don't really have a choice. Feeling empowered to negotiate, even though it shouldn't all come down to on your shoulders, knowing what the landscape looks like, what salaries you should expect, being able to articulate the value that you bring to a particular job, all works well. And when you're a leader, doing it for the women that you're leading.
You can access MIT's career resources at capd.mit.edu, and you can learn more about Brookdale Community College and its Women in Learning and Leadership program at brookdalecc.edu. As the Federal Reserve continues to raise interest rates in a bid to bring down decades-high inflation, the economic outlook in the U.S. is a little murky, to say the least. If you've been cutting back on your expenses, you're not alone. And our main guest today argues that having a solid spending and savings plan is particularly important for women, especially women of color. Kate McCallister-Young is the director of America Saves, a nonprofit dedicated to helping Americans save their money and reduce their debt. She says many of their clients, or savers, are low-income women, working moms, and homemakers trying to make ends meet. No matter where you fall on that spectrum, she says the goal is to build financial confidence, even amidst rumors of a recession.
Women, we tend to second guess ourselves. A lot of that has to do with the stories that we've been told through society and, through the generations that we're not as great with money. And there's also like the systemic side of this where we're actually making less money than our male counterparts. And so on one side of things, it's kind of a mindset or our own money stories or what we were taught to believe. And then the other part of this is the fact that we're already a little bit behind. So our money doesn't stretch us farther because we are making less. And then we have so many different priorities that we often tend to put ourselves last, not consciously, but, some of the decisions that we make sometimes don't put us in the best position financially. And so we don't necessarily advocate for ourselves in the way that we can. And so that's part of what we'll be talking about today, hopefully, is to how to, no matter what lifestyle you've chosen, whether it is to not work outside of the home and really focus, solely on your family, or if your goal is to work outside of the home, how can you still advocate for yourself as a woman and still be financially confident?
Yeah, especially because oftentimes our money needs to go farther. I mean, in heterosexual relationships, at least, women are more likely to live longer and outlive their partners. So how do we go about becoming more financially confident?
Yeah. So we define financial confidence as having kind of three things happening. You have a very clear view of your finances. So you know your income, you know what expenses you have, and you know what you are saving for. You know what your goals are financially, right? So you have a clear view of your finances, and then you are taking actionable steps toward the things that you want to happen, what those goals are, so that you are, if the goal is to reducing your debt, you're actually doing those things. You have a plan for your financial goals. And then the third piece of financial confidence is having a community where you can get support and resources. And that's a piece that's often missing. And that community can look like a lot of different things. It's not just one person or one thing. America Saves could be a part of your community that you've built to get tips or strategies. It could be knowing where to go within your local community if you are food insecure, knowing where to go to get access to food. So having all three of those things, a clear view of your finances, being able to have a plan to take action for it, and to have a community for support to help fill in the gaps is how you become more financially confident, because it's not necessarily about how much money you have in the bank. It's about knowing that whatever happens, you will be able to find out how to get support and help.
So it's that feeling of like, okay, whatever happens, I'm going to get through it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's not just like, oh, I make so much money that I can be financially confident. It's like, no matter what comes up, I can figure this out.
When it comes to step 2, coming up with the plan, what should you keep in mind there?
Yeah, really, you want that plan to be led by your personal values. So everyone has something that really drives them. It could be giving back, whether it be their church or to their community. Some people's values are very much about what their retirement will look like. They want to be able to retire with a certain lifestyle. Some people's personal values are led by the fact that they want to pay for their children's college and not have, their child burdened with that. So whatever that personal values you have, we kind of start there when you're making that decision of when you look at all of your income and your expenses and what your savings goals are, and you're accessing your financial landscape and having to make some decisions about what stays and what goes. If your savings goals are tied to the things that you are motivated and passionate about the most, you are more likely to stick with them. So we really have you look at what's most important to you, your own personal values, and then base your savings goals off of that, because it's easier to stick to it rather than what a lot of us have heard, which is, oh, you just need to have like 6 to 9 months of your expenses saved up. Well, if you're not making a fair and living wage, that becomes overwhelming. Or if you're a single mother, and are living paycheck to paycheck, that doesn't sound as attainable. But if you are a single mom and you are led to make sure that your kids have, better opportunities than you are, and paying for their college and putting away for that is really important for you, you will find a way. So that's why it's so important to really look at your own personal values when you're deciding like, okay, how can I make this a reality? It motivates you and encourages you a little bit more.
Are there any common mistakes you see people making when they're trying to save for the future?
Yeah, one common mistake that I see a lot is going off of what someone else has told you, or listening to someone who is telling you what is right and wrong. So I'm kind of going back to what we were talking about. There was one time that I was working with a saver, and they were assessing their financial landscape, and they saw that they spent a lot on eating out. And when they saw those numbers, after they had looked at their bank statements, they were like, oh, is that bad? And they were asking me, and I was like, I don't get to say if that's bad or not, because it may be exactly what brings you joy in life. And if eating out brings you joy and you're willing to sacrifice in another area, then eat out because you know what I mean? It may be that you decided, I'm going to eat out, but I'm not going to have cable. I think a big mistake is going off of what someone else has decided is good or bad, because you won't stick with a plan that is not aligned with who you are at your core. I think another mistake is not necessarily that people are making, but that personal finance experts are making, which is this idea of like shaming or guilting people for how they spend money or for the type of job that they have or how much income that they're having, placing the blame on them for their situation or their financial scenario right now, where everyone is a little different. Our stories and our lived experiences are different. And so I think we really need to stay away from the idea that just because, we've been able to get to a certain lifestyle, that it should be as easy for everyone else, or because they haven't, that just means that they're lazy.
I think that's a great point. Whenever I go on Instagram or TikTok, it's like really easy to get bombarded by these financial gurus, I guess, who are like, you should have X amount of money by the time you're age 30. And then I'm like, okay, so I feel terrible. And you don't even really want to try after that. It's really easy to just get discouraged.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, that's a lot of the sentiment of millennials and Gen Z are like, what am I going to save for? There's nothing has been going right lately financially. And so I'm going to save for retirement. We may not even ever get there. And so I'm going to live my life now. And there has to be a balanced approach. And I think if we continue down this path of like shaming and guilting people, that balanced approach is going to disappear. So that's not to say that retirement isn't important. It is extremely important. But there has to be a balance for people, especially after the pandemic. We all recognize how important joy in those small things and being connected with other people are. And so what worked pre-COVID isn't necessarily the same message that people need to hear post-COVID, because a lot of our ideals and perspectives changed with that.
Well, to get into a little bit of like the specific tools and tips to save, are there any accounts or plans out there that you feel get overlooked?
So a simple one is there are still a lot of people who just don't even have an additional savings account. And it's not that a regular traditional savings account is going to get you a lot of interest, but there is like behavioral science behind the fact of having an account that is separate, that is just for savings. You're less likely to spend it. So if you don't have just a savings account, all of your money is going into checking, I'd say that is a first practical step. If you do have a savings account right now, we all know interest rates are relatively high. One benefit of high interest rates are returns on high yield savings accounts are really great right now, and other type of savings vehicles such as bonds or CDs. So look into, at minimum, a high yield savings account, because right now the return on those are between 3 and over 4.5%. That one penny that's put into your traditional savings account will be a little bit more in a high yield savings account. So that's something very simple that you can do. Of course, you want to do your research and decide what's the best high yield savings account for you, but there are several options out there. Another really easy strategy to implement that a lot of people don't think about is saving automatically. Having your employer split your direct deposit so that a portion is automatically going into a savings account each pay period is the most simple and effective way to save. And if you aren't paid traditionally, or your employer doesn't offer that, then have your financial institution, either your bank or your credit union, have them do an automated transfer for you once or twice a month into that savings account. So very simple approach to savings, because we like to say the saving is a habit, not a destination. And so just getting into the habit of saving automatically is going to go so far.
If you feel like you should be making more, how do you recommend women approach asking for a raise or salary negotiation in general? Because I feel like there can be a general hesitance to advocate for yourself like that. It's hard.
A lot of women feel or have a hesitancy to negotiate your salary. A lot of it has to do with mindset. As someone who's hired people often, like I expect a negotiation. Most employers at this point do. I'm actually surprised when I don't get a counter. So one, just the idea that they're expecting it may make you feel more comfortable about doing it. And the other thing is a lot of us don't even recognize or realize what we should be getting paid. So take some time to do some research around, the area that you live in, or if you're working remotely across the industry, what on average people are being paid. But most of us know that we're doing great work. You should approach negotiating or asking for your own salary in the same way that we approach advocating for our children or our other loved ones or other things that we're passionate about if we're not mothers. I was thinking earlier today about this idea of the mama bear, even if we're not a mother. There's always something that gets us riled up enough that we are like, I have got to talk about this. I have got to do this thing. Well, when it comes to our salary, we're not just advocating for ourselves here. We're also advocating for our children when we're getting paid more, or our future children, for our legacy, and for other women out there as well. And so this isn't just about me, being paid what I'm worth isn't just about me. When I'm paid more, I'm able to give more, going back to those personal values, I'm able to give more, I'm able to, set my future up for myself. So it's not just about who you are and where you are in your career journey right now. It's about, if you're paid more, you can put more into retirement, or you could save more. Really thinking about what the result of that ask will be will hopefully motivate and encourage you to approach your employer. And when it comes down to how to do it, it is just letting them, asking to have a conversation, going in prepared. So, I've researched what a comparable pay is for this, and here are the results that I've brought the team or the organization, and I would like for you to consider this pay.
You mentioned earlier that your goal is to help women plan no matter what they choose in life, whether they decide to work outside the home or prefer to focus on home life. So if you're a stay-at-home mom, let's talk about some ways that you can still work on building your financial confidence too.
Yeah. So when you sit down to do a spending and savings plan with your partner, making sure that you are also saving for your own retirement. So if your partner has like a 401k or a 403b with their employer, setting up your own IRA just for you, or another type of retirement savings vehicle to ensure that you are also making sure that you're taken care of in retirement too, because, and this isn't just women and men often miscalculate how much they're going to need for retirement. And going back to what you said earlier, women live a longer life on average than men do. So even what you calculate for your retirement, you're probably going to need more than you think you are. And so having that additional account for yourself is one way. If you decide, I'm going to not work outside of the home, that you can make sure that you can feel a little bit more financially confident. The other is to be in communication. Don't turn a blind eye to all things finances. That's not to say if your partner is better at handling finances than you are, or you don't want to, that you have to be totally involved, but knowing where your accounts are, knowing how to access everything, having all the passwords to everything, I think is super important because you never know what's going to happen where you may need to find and access all of that information and your partner may not be available. I've just finished a workshop recently with widows who went through this exact same thing. No one is ever expecting their partner to not be here, but the fact is that happens often and every day. So one way for us to feel financially confident if we decide to not work outside of the home is to make sure that you are aware of all of those things, that you're in communication, that you know exactly where you stand financially.
Well, lastly, there's a lot of economic uncertainty right now. Depending on who you ask, we're either at the risk of a recession or already in one. What do you recommend to help protect yourself?
Yeah, I think that the best thing that we can do right now is going back to what I said earlier, which is having a clear view of your finances. And so we don't use the word budget at America Saves because budget often has a negative connotation. It feels restrictive. So we call it a spending and savings plan. And that spending and savings plan really outlines all the income that you have, all the expenses that you have, and what your actual savings goals are. And you may do that spending and savings plan and realize that, okay, based on where I am right now, I have some work to do before I can do all the things that I want to do. But you're able to clearly see where you stand and you can start making adjustments based on where you want to be. And I think that piece, no matter what's coming, whether it be recession or more inflation or continued housing crisis or all the things, knowing exactly where you stand and where you want to go is one of the only things that we can control about our personal finances. And so not having that clarity or doing what I like to call the ostrich, where we just stick our head in the sand, we don't want to look, can actually leave us with more anxiety. Personal finances there's a lot of emotions tied to that, and it's tied to our own mental health. So I think that's the most important thing, is to know exactly where you are financially.
Kate McCallister-Young is the director of America Saves, a nonprofit dedicated to helping Americans save money, reduce debt, and get on a path to building wealth. You can learn more about its services and its partners at americasaves.org. Kate, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
Let's go upstairs and return to 1869.
One last story before we go, out of upstate New York. The Kate Mullany House in Troy is preparing to reopen to the public after a years-long restoration and rebuilding project. The National Historic Site on 8th Street now hosts the American Labor Studies Center, but it got its name for housing one of the most important women activists of the early labor movement in the 1860s. Kate Mullany would ultimately create the country's first all-female labor union, but she came to Troy as a young Irish immigrant, just trying to get by with her family.
Center of the universe for labor history for women, right here, for the United States at least. Alrighty.
That's P. Thomas Carroll, a senior scholar with the Hudson Mohawk Industrial Gateway, and today a historical tour guide for the Kate Mullany House. Carroll says the Mullany family lived in the narrow brick building around the same time Troy was starting to make its name as the Collar City. Back in the 19th century, laundry was even more of a chore than it is today. And it was particularly annoying when the only part of the shirt that was dirty was the collar. In the 1820s, the wife of Orlando Montague became so frustrated washing her husband's shirts that she simply cut the collar off, washed it, and sewed it back on. And thus the idea for the detachable collar was born. Soon factories and laundries sprung up around the city to mass-produce removable collars, cuffs, and shirt bosoms called dickies. In 1864, 19-year-old Kate Mullany was one of the more than 3,000 women working in the city's collar industry. And after the death of her father, she was the sole breadwinner for her mother and sisters. Carol says she got a job washing collars at a local laundry for roughly $3 a week. But it could be grueling and dangerous work, grappling with caustic chemicals, bleach, and scalding hot water and irons. Carol says that $3 also didn't go very far.
A couple horrible things happened for all those women who were working in that place, even worse than everyday life. One was that in 1863, the federal government started printing greenbacks without anything to support it, which meant they flooded the country with currency, and the cost of living went just like this. All of a sudden, it would cost you 2 times or 3 times what it would have cost you a year before to feed your kids and to pay the bills. There were perfect conditions at that time for a labor strike.
Mullany and her co-worker Esther Keegan ultimately decided the city's laundry workers deserved better working conditions and better pay. Bringing together a total of roughly 300 women, they formed the Collar Laundry Union and officially went on strike from all of Troy's commercial laundries starting February 23, 1864. The owners caved less than a week later.
They didn't get much in the way of the settlement in that first settlement about caustic chemicals, but they did get a 25% raise. Didn't quite make them whole compared to what cost of living was before the big inflation, but it was enough for them to get by.
Carol says Mullany would go on to become a bit of a household name, leading a few more successful strikes for local working women and becoming Assistant Secretary of the National Labor Union in 1868, making her the first woman to hold national office in organized labor in the U.S. The Mullany family would ultimately buy their building in Troy, along with a few others, and Kate Mullany would return there shortly before her death in 1906. The collar industry in Troy peaked and then dwindled as businesses either closed or moved south during the 20th century. The Kate Mullany House now exists to preserve Mullany's legacy, but it's had a rough process of renovations. The American Labor Studies Center bought the building in 2002 with the hope of creating an adjacent park and memorial for Kate Mullany, and since then it has also used grants to shore up bulging walls, repair the roof, replace the windows, and actually remove plumbing in some spots to return the third-floor apartment to the same conditions that Mullany's mother enjoyed in 1869. But Carol says all of this was set back slightly when a car ran through the building's first floor in 2020.
The car came off Hoosick Street, ran right into the back door on the first floor and smashed it all in. It's just recently been pretty much fully restored. As you may notice, the lights aren't quite on, the water's not quite on yet, so it's just at the tail end of that full restoration.
New York Congressman Paul Tonko also took a tour of the site. In light of Women's History Month, the Democrat from the 20th District recently introduced a resolution in the House to formally honor Kate Mullany for her contributions to the American labor movement. He is also a co-sponsor of the Paycheck Fairness Act in the House.
When women succeed, we all succeed. And again, introducing a Paycheck Fairness Act with Rosa DeLauro, the lead on the bill, tells us that work is yet there's work to be done, that the battle isn't over, and that we need to move forward to make certain we build upon that Equal Pay Act of 1963 and make certain that women have the opportunity statutorily etched to be able to challenge employers on the salary discrimination and to make certain that we close that gender gap on wages and that salary histories are not a requirement or not allowed to be used in interviews or in screening people for job interviews. So a lot of progress that still needs to be done, but very, very proud that I can speak on behalf of a district that housed the powerful statements and actions of a truly outstanding woman and an undeniable labor pioneer.
Carol says the Kate Mullany House will have a grand reopening for the public later this year. The site hopes to have enough full-time staff to be open daily in the next year or two. You can learn more about the site and Kate Mullany's story at its website. That's katemullanyNHS.org. You've been listening to 51%. 51% is a national production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio in Albany, New York. It's produced and hosted by me, Jesse King. Our associate producer is Jody Cowan, our executive producer is Dr. Alan Chartock, and our theme is Lolita by the Albany-based artist Girl Blue. A big thanks to McCallister-Young for taking the time to speak with us this week. To learn more about our guests and the topics discussed on this show, check us out at our flagship station's website. That's WAMCpodcast.org. We hope you'll join us next week. Until then, I'm Jesse King, 51%.
I was every single girl, I was nobody else, I was so sure of myself. I was 15 and a half, he was a hollow laugh. And I lost my cool somewhere along the way. At night and down the hallway, I had to learn how to look away. I lost my cool, no electricity, hot rain on the concrete, sweet